The October wind rattled the windows of the Callahan house as Tony pulled his beat-up Ford truck into the driveway. He'd stayed late at school again, grading papers for his AP history students. The porch light was on, but something felt wrong. Not obviously wrong, just off balance, like a picture frame hanging crooked on a wall. Tony grabbed his worn leather messenger bag from the passenger seat and walked toward the front door. Inside, he could hear the television playing upstairs. Norma must be in her office, working on another one of her consulting projects. She'd been doing more of those lately, spending hours locked away with her computer and phone calls that stopped whenever he entered the room. "Dad!" The voice came from the kitchen, barely louder than a whisper. Tony found his 11-year-old son sitting at the breakfast counter, homework spread across the granite surface, but clearly abandoned. Brand's face was pale, his dark eyes wide, with an expression Tony recognized from his years in Marine intelligence. It was the look soldiers got when they'd witnessed something that changed their understanding of the world. "What's wrong, buddy?" Tony set his bag down and studied his son's face. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Brand's hands trembled as he reached into his backpack. He pulled out his phone, the screen already glowing with a voice recording app. The timestamp showed the recording had been made 47 minutes ago. "I heard Mom talking," Brand whispered, glancing toward the stairs. "She was in her office, and the door was cracked open. I was just going to the bathroom, but I heard her say something weird." Tony's jaw tightened. Years of military training had taught him to listen to instincts, and every instinct he had was suddenly screaming danger. "What kind of weird?" Instead of answering, Brand pressed the play button. Norma's voice filled the kitchen, crystal clear through the phone speakers. Tony knew that voice better than his own heartbeat, or thought he did. He doesn't suspect a thing. His insurance clears in 6 weeks. Yes, both of them. A pause. The sound of papers rustling. Then Norma's voice again, colder than Tony had ever heard it. "The boy won't be a problem after. Trust me, Merrick. I've planned for everything." Tony's so predictable. Still thinks I'm the woman he married. Poor fool has no idea what's coming. Another voice, male, crackling through what sounded like a phone on speaker. "You sure about the timing? 6 weeks is cutting it close. It's perfect. He'll be dead before Christmas. Natural causes, of course. That mountain road can be so dangerous in winter weather. And the kid, grief-induced suicide. 2 weeks later. Tragic story of a boy who couldn't live without his father. The insurance companies will practically throw money at me." The recording ended. The kitchen fell into a silence, so complete that Tony could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. His blood had turned to ice water, and for a moment, he couldn't breathe. "Dad!" Brand's voice cracked with the weight of what they'd both just heard. "What does it mean? Why would Mom say those things?" Tony looked at his son, really looked at him. This kid who still believed in the fundamental goodness of people, who trusted that his parents would protect him from the world's darkness, who had no idea he'd just recorded his own mother planning his murder. The tactical part of Tony's mind kicked in, the part that had kept him alive through 3 tours in Afghanistan. Assess the threat. Identify resources. Plan escape routes. No emotion. No hesitation. Survive first, process later. "Brand," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside his chest. "I need you to pack a bag right now. Just the essentials. Clothes for a few days, your medications, anything you can't replace." "But Dad, maybe we misunderstood. Now, son, move fast and move quiet." Brand's eyes went wide, but he nodded and slipped off the stool. Tony listened to the sound of small feet running up the stairs, then pulled out his own phone. He forwarded the recording to 3 different email accounts, then uploaded it to a secure cloud server Wes had set up for him years ago. Upstairs, he could hear Norma moving around in her office, probably on another call with this Merrick person, probably planning the details of how she was going to kill her husband and son for insurance money. How long had she been planning this? How long had he been living with a stranger who smiled at him over breakfast while calculating his death? Tony moved through the house like a ghost, grabbing essentials from his bedroom. His passport, hidden in a book safe Norma didn't know about. The emergency cash he kept taped under a drawer. His service pistol, unloaded but cleaned and readied. 22 minutes after hearing the recording, Tony loaded 2 duffel bags in his truck while Norma's shower ran upstairs. He left no note, no explanation, no trace of where they might be going. By the time she realized they were gone, he'd have enough of a head start to disappear completely. "Where are we going?" Bran asked as they pulled out of the driveway. In the rearview mirror, Tony could see the house where he'd thought he was building a life with the woman he loved. "Somewhere safe," he said. "Somewhere we can think." The drive to West Jarrett's cabin took 43 minutes through winding mountain roads that most people avoided after dark. Tony had made this drive dozens of times over the years, usually for hunting trips or when he needed to clear his head after particularly difficult days at school. Now he was running for his life and his son's life from the woman who'd shared his bed for 12 years out Wes's place, sat in a hollow where cell phone towers couldn't reach, and the nearest neighbor was 3 miles away through thick forest. The cabin itself looked modest from the outside, weathered with siding, a stone chimney, windows that reflected the headlights like watchful eyes. Wes opened the front door before Tony could knock. 6'4" and built like the linebacker he'd been in college, with graying hair and pale blue eyes that missed nothing. He took one look at Tony's face and stepped aside without a word. "How long you need?" Wes asked as Tony carried the bags inside. "Don't know yet." Tony watched Bran explore the cabin's main room, taking in the gun safe, the tactical maps on the walls, the communication equipment that definitely wasn't standard civilian gear. "Need to use your secure connection. Basement. Kid can have the guest room upstairs." Wes had been Tony's squad leader in the Marines, back when they were both young and thought they could save the world one mission at a time. They'd pulled each other out of more firefights than Tony cared to count, shared water when there wasn't enough to go around, trusted each other with secrets that could end careers or start wars. Trust wasn't something you questioned with men like Wes. You just acted on it. The basement of the cabin revealed Wes's real business. Not the tactical gear shop he ran in town, but the information brokerage he maintained for clients who needed things the government couldn't officially provide. Bank-grade encryption hardware, multiple VPN layers, and computer systems that could crack into networks most people didn't know existed. "What happened?" Wes asked as Tony settled in front of the keyboard that cost more than most people's cars. Tony played Bran's recording. Wes listened without comment, his face growing harder with each word. "Jesus Christ, Tony. Your own wife, ex-wife, as of about an hour ago." Tony's fingers moved across the keyboard, muscle memory guiding him through security protocols he'd learned in another life. "I need to know how deep this goes." Norma thought she was clever with her passwords, but Tony had been watching her type for years. Birthdays, pet names, anniversary dates, people always thought they were more creative than they actually were. Her cloud accounts opened like flower petals in sunlight, revealing secrets that made Tony's stomach clench with each new discovery. Life insurance policies. Multiple companies, multiple policies. Tony's coverage, $2 million. Purchased 4 months ago through Northwestern Mutual. Bran's policy, $1 million. Purchased just 6 weeks ago through State Farm. Both policies listed Norma as the sole beneficiary. Both had been purchased with forged signatures that looked like Tony's handwriting but weren't quite right. "She's been busy," Wes muttered, reading over Tony's shoulder. The financial records were worse. Cryptocurrency wallets containing hundreds of thousands of dollars. Bitcoin, Ethereum, and several digital currencies Tony didn't recognize. Money that had been transferred from various sources over the past 8 months. All of it flowing toward accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. A folder labeled legal documents made Tony's jaw clench. Custody papers already drawn up, naming Norma as Bran's sole guardian in the event of Tony's death. A will that left everything to her, complete with a signature that matched Tony's handwriting perfectly. Someone had been practicing, and then the file that made his blood freeze. Final timeline, a detailed plan, laid out like a military operation. Tony's death staged as a car accident on Highway 105, the winding mountain road he took to work every day. Brake failure during the morning commute. Just another tragic accident on a dangerous stretch of road. Bran's death was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Positioned as grief-induced suicide. A young boy who couldn't live without his father, who'd jumped from the same bridge where his father had died. The insurance companies would pay out without question who would suspect a grieving mother of murdering her own child. She thought of everything, Tony said, his voice hollow. Not everything, Wes replied. She didn't count on the kid being smart enough to record her. Tony copied every file to an encrypted drive, then began uploading backup copies to secure servers in 3 different countries. Insurance policies for his insurance policy. You've got enough evidence to put her away for life, Wes said. Not enough to guarantee a conviction. Any decent lawyer could argue that digital evidence can be faked. Tony's mind was already 3 steps ahead, planning like the intelligence officer he'd once been. I need her to incriminate herself. Audio recordings. Video evidence. Something that shows clear intent and can't be dismissed as manipulation. Upstairs, Bran had fallen asleep on the couch, still fully clothed. Tony covered him with a thick wool blanket and stood watching his son's peaceful face. This kid who'd just saved both their lives without fully understanding what he'd stumbled into. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tony spent the next morning creating a paper trail that would survive nuclear war. He burned the evidence files onto 6 different drives, each one encrypted with military-grade security protocols. The drives went to different locations: a safety deposit box in Asheville under a false identity, a Marine buddy in Virginia who specialized in making things disappear, a lawyer in Charlotte who handled witness protection cases, and 3 other locations that even Wes didn't know about. Paranoid much? Wes asked, handing him coffee that could strip paint. Just learned my wife of 12 years is planning to murder me and our son for insurance money, Tony replied. I'm thinking paranoid might not be enough. While Tony worked on evidence preservation, Wes had been conducting surveillance. Photos spread across the kitchen table showed Norma's routine over the past 48 hours. Her gym visits. Her lunch meetings with friends who probably had no idea what she really was. Her twice-weekly appointments at a coffee shop downtown. She's meeting with someone, Wes said, tapping a photo of Norma sitting across from a well-dressed man in his 40s. Same guy, same table, every Tuesday and Friday. Tony studied the photos. The man looked familiar, though he couldn't place where he'd seen him before. Run his face through the database. Wes's fingers flew over a different keyboard, one connected to systems that definitely weren't supposed to exist. Merrick Shaw, age 41. Ex-cybersecurity expert for J.P. Morgan Chase. Did 5 years federal time for hacking financial institutions and stealing customer data. Released 3 years ago. My wife's got expensive taste in criminals. Gets better. Shaw's been running crypto laundering operations since his release. FBI's been watching him, but they can't prove anything. He's smart. Tony studied Shaw's photo. Handsome in a polished way, the kind of man who could charm his way into corporate boardrooms or prison cells with equal ease. Smart enough to plan a murder, smart enough to make it look like an accident. The surveillance photos showed a pattern. Norma and Shaw met every Tuesday and Friday at 2 p.m., always at the same corner table in Ground for Thought, a coffee shop 3 blocks from the courthouse. They never touched, never displayed any obvious signs of intimacy. But their body language told a different story. How long have they been meeting? Tony asked. Started tracking them 2 days ago, but the waitress says they've been regulars for months. Maybe longer. Tony felt something cold settle in his chest. Months. While he'd been teaching teenagers about the Battle of Gettysburg and helping Bran with algebra homework, his wife had been planning his death with a convicted felon. I need to get them talking, Tony said. On record. About the specific details of their plan. Wes nodded toward a corner of the basement where surveillance equipment was stacked like a military supply depot. I've got directional microphones that can pick up conversations through windows from half a mile away. Audio recording devices small enough to hide in a sugar packet. Video cameras that look like shirt buttons. Legal admissibility? Depends how creative we get with the setup. But if we can get her to confess on tape, admissibility becomes a secondary concern. Tony studied the surveillance photos again. Norma looked relaxed in the pictures, confident. She thought she was hunting him, probably assumed he was running scared with no plan beyond basic survival. Time to show her what it felt like to be prey. The first phase was simple. Make her think she'd won. Sheriff Lane arrived at Boone High School Thursday morning with 2 deputies and a warrant. Tony watched from Wes's truck in the parking lot across the street as they walked into the building where he'd taught American history for 8 years. "What are the charges?" Wes asked, adjusting the focus on his binoculars. Tony scanned the legal document through his own pair. Kidnapping in the first degree, domestic abuse, mental instability with a history of violent threats. He lowered the binoculars. "She's been planning this for months." "How do you figure?" "Look at the timeline. These charges didn't get filed overnight. She's got witnesses lined up, documentation of my supposed mental health issues, probably medical records showing Brand's fear of me." Tony's voice was calm, analytical. "This is phase 1 of her plan. Destroy my credibility. Make me look like an unstable veteran who snapped." Tony's phone buzzed with a text from his principal. "Tony, please call me immediately. There are serious allegations. The school board is demanding answers." Another text, this one from his department head. "Whatever's going on, we're here for you. But you need to get in front of this. By 10 a.m., the local news vans had arrived. Channel 13, Channel 7, and the regional CNN affiliate. By noon, Tony Callahan was the lead story on every station. Local teacher suspected of kidnapping own son that Norma's press conference was masterfully orchestrated. She stood on the courthouse steps wearing the blue dress Tony had bought her for their anniversary. The one she'd said made her feel beautiful. Her makeup was perfect except for carefully placed tear tracks, and she clutched a tissue like a lifeline. "My husband has been unstable lately," she told the cameras, her voice breaking at exactly the right moments. "He's been talking about running away, starting over somewhere new. He said he was tired of his life here, tired of the responsibilities." A reporter called out, "Mrs. Callahan, do you believe your son is in danger?" Norma's face crumpled with what looked like genuine anguish. "I pray that Tony won't hurt Brand. But when someone you love becomes someone you don't recognize." She trailed off, dabbing her eyes. "She should win an Oscar," Wes said. Tony watched his wife lie to the cameras with the skill of a professional actress. Every gesture calculated, every word designed to build sympathy while destroying his reputation. "How long until we release your video?" Wes asked. Tony checked his watch. "Let her enjoy this for 24 hours. Then we remind her who she's actually dealing with." That evening, every major news outlet in North Carolina received an anonymous email with a video attachment. Tony had recorded it in Wes's basement, sitting at a simple metal desk with the evidence spread before him like a prosecutor's closing argument. "My name is Tony Callahan," he began, looking directly into the camera with the steady gaze of a man trained to brief generals. "For the past 8 years, I've taught your children about American history, about how truth eventually surfaces no matter how deep people try to bury it." He held up the printed insurance policies, each page clearly visible to the camera. "These are life insurance documents purchased by my wife, Norma Callahan, within the last 6 months. $2 million on my life. $1 million on my 11-year-old son's life. She is the sole beneficiary on both policies." Tony's voice never wavered, never showed emotion. Just facts, delivered with the precision of a man trained to handle classified information. "I have recorded evidence of my wife's plan to murder both myself and my son for insurance money. I have evidence of her criminal relationship with convicted felon Merrick Shaw. I have evidence of financial crimes totaling over $400,000. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes boring into the camera. "Sheriff Lane issued a warrant for my arrest without investigating any of these facts. I invite the state police, the FBI, and anyone interested in actual justice to examine what I'm about to release." The video ended with Tony uploading dozens of files to a public server, each document clearly labeled and time-stamped. Within 2 hours, the video had been viewed 80,000 times. Within 4 hours, it was trending on social media across 3 states. Tony's phone started ringing at midnight and didn't stop. Tony's phone had been ringing continuously since 6 a.m. Friday morning. Reporters, federal agents, school board members, former students, and at least 6 people claiming to be documentary filmmakers. He let them all go to voicemail. The only call he answered was from Assistant District Attorney Tilda Ransom. "Mr. Callahan? This is ADA Ransom. I think we need to have a conversation. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Can you meet me somewhere private? Somewhere Sheriff Lane's people won't be watching." Tony gave her directions to a truck stop diner 30 miles south of Boone. Far enough from town to avoid surveillance, but public enough to be safe for both of them. Tilda Ransom was younger than Tony had expected, probably mid-30s, with short brown hair and the kind of sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She slid into the booth across from him, carrying a tablet, a legal pad, and the expression of someone who'd been up all night reviewing evidence. "I've been going through your files," she said without preamble. "Most of it's circumstantial, but there's enough to get warrants. Real warrants, not the garbage Sheriff Lane pushed through. But I need more than circumstantial evidence to guarantee a conviction. Your wife's going to hire the best criminal defense attorney money can buy, and they'll tear apart anything that can't be independently verified." Tony sipped his coffee, studying the prosecutor's face. "What do you need from me?" "Audio recordings of her admitting intent to commit murder. Video evidence of her meeting with Shaw to plan crimes. Something that puts her at the scene of an actual criminal act, not just planning one. She's smart. She won't incriminate herself easily." Tilda leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Then we make her think she's already won. Make her feel safe enough to get sloppy." Back at the cabin, Wes was monitoring police communications and social media chatter. "Your wife's panicking," he reported. "Made 6 bank visits today. Closed 4 accounts. Transferred everything to offshore holdings. Also bought a plane ticket to Costa Rica under a false name. Running away, or positioning for a quick exit once the heat gets too close." Wes handed him a surveillance photo taken outside the third bank. "Look at her face." In the photo, Norma looked haggard for the first time Tony could remember. Her makeup was smudged, her hair less than perfect, her expression tight with stress. "There's more," Wes continued. "Merrick Shaw tried to leave town this morning. Got pulled over for speeding on Highway 321. Trooper found a suitcase full of cash and 3 different fake passports." Tony studied the booking photo of Shaw in handcuffs. "How much cash?" $140,000. Small bills, probably been collecting it for weeks. Partnership falling apart. Looks like it. Your wife visited him in lockup this afternoon. Brought him coffee from that place where they used to meet." Wes handed him another surveillance photo, this one taken through the jail's visiting room window. Norma sat across from Shaw, leaning forward as if whispering. Her body language was tense, desperate. "She handed him something," Wes said. "Looked like sugar packets for his coffee." Tony studied the image. Norma's face was turned away from the camera, but he could see her hands moving over Shaw's cup. Thoughtful of her to bring him coffee. "Gets better." Shaw got violently sick about an hour after she left. Vomiting, severe stomach cramps, heart palpitations. Paramedics had to take him to the hospital. Poison. Doctors pumped his stomach. Found traces of oleander extract. Highly toxic if you know how to prepare it. Wes's voice was grim. "Your wife tried to kill her partner." Tony set the photo down, feeling something cold settle in his chest. Even when cornered, Norma was still trying to eliminate loose ends. Still thinking 3 moves ahead. Still willing to commit murder to protect herself. "Shaw's talking now," Wes added. "Wants a deal in exchange for testimony against your wife. FBI's offering witness protection. Time to push her over the edge," Tony said. ADA Ransom met Tony at an abandoned gas station outside town Saturday night, bringing with her a digital recorder and a federal warrant for wiretaps on Norma's phone. The place had been closed for years, but the parking lot was well lit and visible from the road safe for clandestine meetings. "Merrick Shaw is talking," she said, sliding into Tony's truck. "Wants a deal in exchange for testimony. But his story needs independent corroboration." "What's he saying?" "That your wife hired him to hack life insurance company databases. Change policy effective dates. Make it look like the coverage had been in place for years instead of months. He also claims she's been planning this for over a year." Tony felt something twist in his stomach. A year. While he'd been helping Bran with science fair projects and teaching kids about the Constitution, his wife had been planning to murder them both. Shaw also says she tampered with your truck. Tilda continued. Cut the brake line sometime last month. When that didn't work, apparently you don't drive the mountain roads often enough. She moved to plan B. The insurance scheme, right? Make it look like you kidnapped your son in a mental breakdown. Then both of you died in a car accident while running from the law. Clean, simple, and profitable. Tilda handed him a small device about the size of a quarter. This is a GPS tracker. Military grade, waterproof, and nearly indestructible. If something happens to you, we'll know exactly where you are within 3 feet. You think she'll try again? I think a woman who poisoned her criminal partner won't hesitate to finish what she started, especially if she thinks you're getting too close to exposing her. Sunday morning, Tony made his first deliberate mistake, that he drove Bran to Riverside Park in downtown Boone, making sure to use main roads where traffic cameras would record his license plate. They stayed for 2 hours, playing catch with a worn baseball and talking about normal things. Father and son, taking a break from the nightmare their lives had become. Norma's silver Lexus appeared in the parking lot 47 minutes after they arrived. She positioned herself 300 yards away, partially hidden behind a maintenance building, but clearly visible to anyone who knew where to look. Tony pretended not to notice, while Wes monitored her communications from a surveillance van on the opposite side of the park. She's making calls. Wes's voice crackled through Tony's nearly invisible earpiece. Calling someone named Vincent. Sounds like she's setting up a meeting. Tony threw the baseball to Bran, keeping his movements casual and relaxed. Can you get audio? Working on it there. She's talking about finalizing arrangements. Says the timeline just moved up. How much? She wants everything finished by Wednesday. For days from now. Tony caught the ball and ruffled Bran's hair, playing the role of a carefree father while his mind raced through tactical possibilities. Time to go, buddy. As they walked back to the truck, Tony caught a glimpse of Norma's face through her windshield. The woman who'd once smiled at him across breakfast tables, who'd held his hand during movies, who'd cried tears of joy when Bran was born, now watched him with the cold calculation of a predator sizing up prey. Monday evening, Tony sent Norma a text from a burner phone. Your son is dead. Thought you should know. Attached was a photograph that had taken Wes 3 hours to create using military-grade photo manipulation software. Bran lying motionless in what looked like a hospital bed, machines and tubes surrounding him, his face pale and still. The image was heartbreaking and completely convincing that Norma's response came back in less than 3 minutes. Good. One less liability. Tony stared at the screen, reading those 4 words over and over. The mother of his child had just celebrated what she believed was her son's death, had called her own 11-year-old boy a liability to be eliminated. Wes looked over his shoulder and swore softly. Jesus Christ, Tony, I'm sorry you had to see that. Don't be. Tony's voice was steady, controlled. Now we have her. The federal wiretap on Norma's phone caught her call to Merrick Shaw in the hospital 23 minutes later. Despite being under police guard and still recovering from oleander poisoning, Shaw was coherent enough to take the call. It's done, Norma said, her voice clear and cold on the recording. The boy's gone. Tony will probably kill himself from grief within the week. What about the investigation? Shaw's voice was weak, but audible. That prosecutor's been asking questions. Ransom's making noise, but she's got nothing solid. Once Tony's dead, it all goes away. Tragic family destroyed by a father's mental breakdown. The media loves that kind of story. The brake tampering could still. Will never be traced back to me. I used your tools, remember? Your fingerprints are the only ones on the equipment. Your DNA on the cables. A long silence on the line. Then Shaw's voice, bitter with the realization of how completely he'd been manipulated. You played me. I played everyone, darling. That's how you survive in this world. That's how you win. What about the money? My share. What money? You're going to prison for the rest of your life. Dead men don't need bank accounts. The call ended with Shaw cursing and Norma laughing in the federal surveillance van outside the hospital. Agents looked at each other with expressions of grim satisfaction. Think that's enough? One asked. ADA Ransom smiled for the first time in weeks. More than enough. Wednesday morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of mountain fog that turned the world into a ghost story. Norma drove her Lexus to a coffee shop in Asheville, 90 minutes south of Boone, to meet with a man who claimed to sell false identities for people who needed to disappear. She'd found him through an encrypted message board that Shaw had recommended before their partnership turned lethal. The man's credentials checked out at least. They would have if she'd been dealing with an actual criminal instead of FBI Special Agent Vincent Torres. The coffee shop was perfect for the operation. Multiple exits, good sight lines, and enough civilian traffic to provide cover for the backup teams positioned throughout the area. Norma arrived precisely on time, wearing dark sunglasses and a black coat that made her look like she was attending a funeral, which, in a way, she was her own. Agent Torres was already seated at a corner table, playing the part of a nervous document forger. Leather jacket, shifty eyes, the kind of man who dealt in false passports and offshore bank accounts. "You need papers for where?" he asked as Norma sat down across from him. "Non-extradition country," she replied without hesitation. "Somewhere warm. I'm tired of North Carolina winters, and I suspect they're about to get much colder. That's expensive. $50,000 for a clean passport, complete with entry stamps and travel history. Another $20,000 for supporting documents, driver's license, credit cards, social security card." Norma opened her purse and pulled out a thick manila envelope. $70,000. Cash. Non-sequential bills, like you requested. What she didn't notice was the wire taped to Torres's chest, or the backup agents sitting at tables around the coffee shop, or the sniper on the roof across the street who had her in his scope just in case she'd brought friends. "Norma Callahan," Torres said, his voice suddenly losing all traces of criminal nervousness. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder." The coffee shop exploded into controlled chaos. Federal agents appeared from every direction, weapons drawn, but pointed safely away from civilians. Customers screamed and dove for cover while others pulled out phones to record the arrest. "FBI, get down. Get down now." Norma sat frozen for a moment, the envelope of cash still in her hands, her face cycling through confusion, fear, and finally rage as she realized she'd been trapped. "You have the right to remain silent," Torres said as two agents moved to handcuff her. "You have the right to an attorney." Across the street, Tony watched through binoculars from the passenger seat of Wes's truck. His former wife, being read her rights while federal agents secured the scene. "Feel better?" Wes asked. Tony lowered the binoculars and watched as agents led Norma toward their vehicles. She looked small suddenly, diminished without her confidence and her carefully constructed lies. As they reached the car, Norma looked directly at the building where Tony was watching. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance, and Tony could see her lips moving. "You ruined me," she mouthed. Tony rolled down the window, just far enough for his voice to carry across the street. "No, you did that the day you planned to bury your son." The Caldwell County Courthouse had never hosted a case quite like the people of North Carolina versus Norma Elizabeth Callahan. ADA Tilda Ransom brought evidence that filled 8 bankers' boxes and required a team of expert witnesses just to explain the financial crimes. Tony sat in the gallery's front row wearing his best charcoal suit, with Bram beside him in clothes that actually fit properly now. They'd both lost weight over the past 3 months, but the kid was sleeping through the night again and had even started smiling occasionally. Norma's defense attorney was Marcus Kellerman, a high-priced criminal lawyer from Charlotte known for getting wealthy clients acquitted of impossible charges. He wore $1,000 suits and spoke in the kind of smooth, honeyed voice that could make a jury believe almost anything. That Kellerman's strategy was predictable. Paint Norma as a battered wife driven to desperation by an abusive husband trained to kill. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said in his opening statement, "my client lived in fear. Fear of a man trained by the United States Marine Corps to inflict violence. A man who disappeared with her child and made terrorist threats against her life." Kellerman paced in front of the jury box, making eye contact with each juror in turn. "Norma Callahan is not a criminal mastermind. She's a victim who made desperate choices because she saw no other way to protect herself and her son." Tilda Ransom's opening was shorter and infinitely more devastating. The defense wants you to believe this case is about domestic abuse, she said, standing directly in front of the jury without notes or theatrics. It's not. This case is about greed. Pure, calculating greed that led a mother to plan the murder of her own child for insurance money. She turned to look directly at Norma, who sat perfectly still at the defense table. The evidence will show that Norma Callahan purchased $3 million in life insurance on her husband and son. The evidence will show that she hired a convicted criminal to help her stage their deaths. And the evidence will show that when she thought her 11-year-old son was dead, she celebrated. The first week of testimony established the financial timeline. Bank records, insurance policies, cryptocurrency transactions that painted a picture of systematic preparation for murder. Shaw testified on Tuesday, looking pale and thin in his orange jumpsuit. He'd already pled guilty to conspiracy charges in exchange for his cooperation, but his testimony was devastating. She approached me in February, he said, his voice barely audible in the packed courtroom. Said she had a business proposition. High risk, high reward. What was the proposition? Ransom asked. Help her kill her husband and kid. Make it look like accidents. Split the insurance money 50-50. How much insurance money? $3 million total. She showed me the policies, said she'd been planning it for months. Kellerman's cross-examination tried to paint Shaw as an unreliable witness with every reason to lie, but the man stuck to his story with the consistency of someone telling the truth. Wednesday brought the technical evidence. Digital forensics experts explained how Norma had used Shaw's equipment to hack insurance company databases. Financial analysts traced money through a maze of offshore accounts. FBI agents testified about the wiretap recordings and Norma's attempt to poison Shaw. Thursday was Norma's turn to testify in her own defense. She wore a simple navy dress and minimal makeup, looking like a grieving mother rather than an accused murderer. Kellerman guided her through a carefully rehearsed story of abuse, fear, and desperation. Tony changed after his military service, she said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. He became angry, controlling. He would disappear for hours without explanation. I was afraid of what he might do. Did you take out insurance policies on your husband and son? Yes, but only to protect Brand's future. If something happened to Tony, I wanted to make sure our son would be taken care of. Did you conspire with Merrick Shaw to kill your family? Never. I met with Mr. Shaw about legitimate computer consulting work. He must have misunderstood our business relationship. Ransom's cross-examination destroyed Norma's carefully constructed facade in 37 minutes. Mrs. Callahan, she began, approaching the witness stand with a transcript in her hands. You testified that you were afraid of your husband. Is that correct? Yes. Yet you purchased life insurance policies worth $3 million without telling him. Doesn't that suggest you were planning his death rather than fearing it? Kellerman objected, but the judge allowed the question. I was trying to protect my son's future, Norma repeated, by celebrating his death. Ransom played the recording of Norma's text response. Good. One less liability. The courtroom fell silent as Norma's voice filled the space, cold and calculating as she discussed murdering Shaw to cover her tracks. Mrs. Callahan, did you attempt to poison Merrick Shaw in the county jail? I brought him coffee. He was sick. Coffee laced with oleander extract, a substance that would have killed him if he hadn't received immediate medical attention. I don't know anything about poison. Ransom produced crime scene photos showing oleander plants in Norma's garden, along with a chemistry textbook about plant toxins found in her home office. You studied plant chemistry in college, didn't you, Mrs. Callahan? That was years ago. But you remember enough to know that oleander extract is nearly undetectable in coffee, don't you? Kellerman's objections became increasingly frantic as Ransom systematically dismantled every lie Norma had constructed. When Tony testified Friday morning, the courtroom was completely silent. Do you still love your wife, Mr. Callahan? Ransom asked. Tony looked directly at Norma for the first time since the trial began. She's the mother of my child, he said quietly. But the woman I married died a long time ago. The person sitting over there is a stranger who tried to kill an 11-year-old boy for money. No further questions. Brand testified last. reading from the recording he'd made that started everything. His voice was steady, but Tony could see his hands shaking as he held the transcript. "I thought maybe I heard wrong," Brand told the jury. "I hoped I heard wrong. But my dad taught me that hope doesn't change facts." "What facts did you learn from this recording?" Ransom asked gently. "That my mom wanted to kill me and my dad for insurance money. That she thought I was a liability." The word liability seemed to echo in the silent courtroom. Norma watched her son testify with no expression at all. No tears, no remorse, no emotion of any kind. Just cold calculation, as if she was trying to figure out where her plan had gone wrong. The jury deliberated for 4 hours and 17 minutes. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman, a retired teacher who reminded Tony of his own father, stood slowly. "We have, Your Honor, on the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of attempted murder of Anthony Callahan, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of attempted filicide, the attempted murder of Brand Callahan, how do you find? Guilty." The verdicts continued for 18 separate charges. 18 counts of guilty that would put Norma away for the rest of her life. Norma stood for sentencing 3 weeks later, wearing an orange jumpsuit and shackles. The judge was the Honorable Patricia Whitman, a woman in her 60s who'd seen every kind of criminal in 30 years on the bench. She looked disgusted as she reviewed the pre-sentencing report. "Mrs. Callahan," Judge Whitman began, "in my career, I have sentenced murderers, rapists, and child molesters. I have seen the worst that humanity has to offer. But I have never encountered someone as coldly calculating as you." She consulted her notes, her voice growing harder with each word. "For conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, 25 years without possibility of parole." Norma's face remained blank, showing no emotion. "For attempted filicide, the attempted murder of your own child, 20 years without possibility of parole." The courtroom was dead silent, except for the scratch of reporters' pens and the hum of recording equipment. "For the attempted murder of your husband, 15 years without possibility of parole. For wire fraud, insurance fraud, money laundering, and related cybercrime, 15 years without possibility of parole." Judge Whitman looked directly at Norma. "These sentences will run consecutively, not concurrently. Your total sentence is 75 years in federal prison without possibility of parole." She leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Callahan, you will die in prison. That is not a threat or a wish. It is a mathematical certainty. You will never again walk free, never again threaten innocent people, and never again see your son." Norma's final look at Tony was pure hatred, but hatred from a cage was just noise. 8 months later, Tony and Brand lived in a small farmhouse outside Montpelier, Vermont, surrounded by 40 acres of forest and fields that stretched to the horizon. Tony taught at the local high school under his middle name, Thomas, while Brand attended a private school that specialized in helping kids recover from trauma. The media had tried to follow them, but Tony knew how to disappear when necessary. Marines learned those skills for survival, and sometimes survival meant starting over completely. He'd written a book about the experience, published under the pseudonym T.A. Morgan. Justice in Silence. A Father's Fight Against Evil became a bestseller within 3 months, though nobody knew who'd actually written it. The royalties paid for Brand's therapy, college fund, and a security system that could stop anything short of a military assault. "Do you think she'll ever get out?" Brand asked one evening while they worked on calculus homework at the kitchen table. Tony looked at his son, who was taller now, and started to look more like the man he'd become than the frightened boy he'd been. "No, she's going to die in prison." "Good." They worked in comfortable silence until Brand spoke again. "Dad, what made her that way? How does someone decide to kill their own kid?" Tony had wondered the same thing during countless sleepless nights. How does a person become capable of murdering their own child? What breaks inside someone to make that possible? "I don't know, buddy. Some people are just born missing the parts that make them human. Will I be like her?" The question hit Tony like a physical blow. He looked at his son, this kid who'd risked everything to save his father's life, who'd testified against his own mother because it was the right thing to do, who still woke up some nights asking if his mom had really wanted him dead. "No," Tony said firmly. You're exactly who you're supposed to be. You're brave and good and nothing like her. Outside, Vermont snow fell past their windows, clean white snow that covered everything and made the world look new. Tony had learned to appreciate small mercies like that. Snow that fell without secrets, trees that grew without lies, silence that meant peace instead of hidden threats. His phone buzzed with a text from Wes. Norma tried to escape last week. Made it to the first fence before the dogs found her. Added 5 years to her sentence for attempted escape. Tony deleted the message without showing Bran. Some information was better kept private. That night, after Bran was asleep, Tony sat on his porch with a cup of coffee and watched the stars through clear mountain air. He thought about the voice recording that had started everything, about choices and consequences, about the moment when someone decides another person's life has no value. Norma had made her choice. Now she'd live with it for the rest of her life, however many years that might be. The woman who tried to kill her own child for insurance money would spend her remaining decades in a concrete box, forgotten by the world she'd tried to manipulate. Some wars are fought in deserts with bullets and bombs. Others are fought around kitchen tables with lies and legal documents. But the battlefield never changes. It's where someone tries to take what's yours. And when they do, you don't run from the fight. You don't forgive. You don't forget. You finish it. Tony finished his coffee and went inside to check on his son one more time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons to teach, new reasons to be grateful for the simple fact of breathing free air. But tonight, the good guys had won, and sometimes that was enough.